Thank you so much for being here. I love Colorado. My brother and his wife lived in Denver for about 10 years. My brother got his law degree here in Denver, and so Christmases and Thanksgivings were spent here, and I felt I almost died coming into Denver airport a couple of times, but I made it through. So it's really a great honor to be here, and thank you for coming out. It shows a great amount of courage for some of you if you're here for the first time to see this kind of information. Because this is a church, and because I saw a flame of truth outside that is dedicated to commitment to truth, what I'd like to do, and this presentation is being taped, I'd like to get this presentation to Sherry Berenson of Channel 12, PBS television here in Denver. What I'm going to do, just to show you my commitment to the truth, I'm going to swear myself up. I swear that all the information that you are about to see is the truth to the best of my 12.5 years of research, to the best of my knowledge, information, and ability. So help me God. Okay, a little bit of housekeeping things. I'm higher than I normally am because the stand is a little bit high. And from our presentation last night, I have an old Mac laptop. And these slides, I've got a tremendous amount of information. The slides are going to go forward very quickly. Every once in a while, the buffering takes some time, and there will be a delay for the next slide to come. And you can just, pray over the laptop when that happens. Okay, so we'll start the presentation. The title of my presentation is Behind the Smoke Curtain: What Happened at the Pentagon on 9/11 and What Didn't, and Why It Matters So Terribly to Our Country. Well, why does it matter? It matters because the lie of 9/11, and I'm going to prove to you that the official story at the Pentagon is a blood libel lie, a big lie, a Hitlerian big lie. You already know from Richard Gage's work and Niels Harriot's work and Professor Stephen Jones's work that the official story at the World Trade Center as to how those buildings collapsed on 9/11, World Trade Centers 1, 2, and 7, is a huge big lie. And when you see that the Pentagon attack, how important it is relative to the other attacks, when you see that the Pentagon attack is the core of the real inside plot of 9/11, and you see that not a single claim of the official story of the Pentagon attack is true, then you will realize that all of the attacks on our civil rights, on our Constitution, our police state, our surveillance state, and at least 2, if not more, unilateral illegal wars that are the highest crime under international law, that all of this has been justified on this huge big lie, blood libel of the 9/11 story. So that's why the 9/11 Truth Movement is so dedicated and committed to finding the truth to the best of our ability, which is extremely difficult because the government has not only lied to us, it has stashed away and classified and hidden so much information that we have to struggle to find the pieces of the truth that really stand the light of day, and then put them together and try to create a coherent story for you. So I'm going to give you the best to my ability after 12.5 years tonight. All right, what you see here over on the table, this is the label of my DVD, same title as the talk tonight. This talk tonight has, it's updated from a year ago at Seattle Town Hall, but this is a professional videotape that represents 4.5 months of post-production edition of video clips, photographs, and graphics by a professional videographer. So even though there's a little bit in tonight's presentation and some important things that aren't in there, you'll have the benefit of having both if you buy the DVD, and I highly recommend you buy the DVD because what I'm not able to get to tonight is who did it and how we know, and I know that that's very important to you, and also the evidence for targeting of the inside explosives in the Pentagon. I'm going to prove to you that the real story at the Pentagon is pre-placed inside the building explosives, just as it is at the World Trade Center. That's the bottom line take-home of message for you from this presentation today. But I'm not going to be able to get to who did it or the evidence for the targeting of those inside explosives at the Pentagon. So I hope that you do get the DVD. And there are many more available than are on top of the table. Also, the identical video that's in the DVD is at that link, and my final slide will be up at the end of the presentation with that link also. So if you do get the DVD, please do write down that link so that if you have family, friends, and colleagues and you want them to see this, you don't have to get another DVD, you don't have to loan out your DVD. They can just go to that link and see the identical videotape. It is 3 hours. Many people have told me that, oh, I will never watch anything more than 20 minutes. However, members of the Truth Movement and the general public have given me the feedback that they started watching and they couldn't stop because the information was so important. I'm going to give you a broad overview of what you're going to see tonight, and then we're going to go into the evidence itself. So this presentation, Behind the Smoke Curtain, presents compelling evidence, one, that the real story at the Pentagon, as I mentioned a moment ago, just as at the World Trade Centers 1, 2, and 7, not hit by any plane, World Trade Center 7 in New York, is pre-placed explosives with inside detonations at the Pentagon beginning at 9:30 in the morning. Whereas the official lie of 9/11 at the Pentagon is that Flight 77, a very large Boeing 757 commercial airliner, didn't hit the building until almost 9:38, almost 8 minutes later, so that the real story, everything I'm going to show you, had already happened at the Pentagon when the official story, Flight 77, was still at least 50 to 70 miles away from Washington. I think that was number 1, so this should have been number 2. Anyway, you're going to see that there wasn't just one plane at the Pentagon, but 2. Now, there were actually more planes than that around high up over the Pentagon, like a C-130 military transport plane, but there were 2 planes close down to the Pentagon, not just one. And that's one of the reasons for the confusion that the people who really perpetrated this attack on the Pentagon, they have intentionally confused us by leading us to believe that there's only one plane at the Pentagon. So there wasn't just one plane, but 2 involved in the key Pentagon events. And the only plane that matters, you will see, which was white, and so it could not have been any American Airlines plane, which is their signature is polished silvery aluminum. The only plane that matters was white and was destroyed near the Pentagon heliport. I'm going to show you that in a moment, at 9:32 and 30 seconds. You'll learn why, we know the time. And this cannot be the official story Flight 77 plane, which didn't even approach the building until almost 9:38. Another major thing you're going to learn is that the internal destruction path, or the so-called plane penetration path inside the Pentagon, inside at a diagonal angle from the official story alleged impact point of Flight 77, was itself made with pre-planted explosives, both on the outside and the inside, and to create the so-called exit hole in the inside of the C-ring. Now, this should have been number... Anyway, you're also going to learn that the core of the real 9/11 plot is, in fact, the Pentagon attack, and why. And for those of you who, in the Colorado 9/11 Truth Movement, who in the last 3 months have seen all 3 parts for a total of 5 hours of Italian film producer and director Massimo Mazzucco's magnificent new film, 9/11, The New Pearl Harbor. For those of you who have seen it in your meetings here in Colorado and Boulder and Grand Junction and Denver over the past 3 months, the reason that, in my opinion, he opens that magnificent documentary with this quote that I'm about to read is because the Pentagon attack is indeed the core of the real plot, as I will support for you in a moment. So at the very opening of 9/11, The New Pearl Harbor, which you must see all 5 hours, every American should, he says on the screen, every time we, in his documentary, make a factual statement, I put factual in quotes, such as, the Pentagon was hit at 9:37. That's rounding down from the official story alleged Flight 77 impact point. We are only referring to what is known as the official version of the events, not necessarily what actually happened at the Pentagon on 9/11. So now I'm going to set the scene for you for the evidence you're about to see over the next almost 2 hours. So I'm going to stand down now. See if can you see the Red? Okay. All right. This is someone else's graphic. It's not mine. It's not exactly perfectly accurate. Can you hear me? May I have the...
They have two of them here, but
may I have the mic?
there were two, but somebody...
May I have the hand mic? Thanks. I think that'll help. Yeah, that's good. Okay. So, this is someone else's graphic. I actually believe it's Massimo Mazzucco's because this is Italian in the upper left-hand corner, but it's good enough for me to make my points about setting the scene for all of the evidence you're going to see. So this is effectively the left half, a little bit more than the left half of the west wall of the Pentagon, and this red dot is approximately where the official story claims that Flight 77's nose hit the wall at almost 9:38. The official story claims that Flight 77 came in only a few feet above the ground and came in at a diagonal, almost 45-degree angle from the perpendicular, that its right wing or engine or some part of the right wing or engine of the plane hit this generator trailer, the diesel fuel for the generator trailer, causing a huge black smoke cloud, causing a fire and a huge black smoke cloud that you remember seeing from the Pentagon to come up from this diesel generator tank for the generator trailer. And they also claimed that it came in like this and that the nose of the plane hit right here at column 14, and went through the wall, which had been hardened to withstand precisely such a terrorist attack. And that it got through that outer wall and it went through oops. Should come up now. There we go. I'll have to hit that periodically. That it went through three rings and all the walls involved, and poked its nose or some part of the plane, and some official reports from the Department of Defense actually say some kind of slurry from the plane poked out of the inside of the third ring in, and as you'll see in a moment, the Pentagon has 5 rings. So through the outside wall, hardened to withstand precisely such a terrorist attack, through 3 rings and outside, just outside the inner wall of the third ring in the C ring, out of 5 rings. So that's the official story. And this is what we call a south path. People in the movement say, oh, this is a south path. What they mean by that is that over here, way out from the wall, is the Naval Annex and the Citgo gas station, both of which have been torn down, by the way, now, and recently. And the what's meant by a south path, it means that the plane came into the south. This is south, that is north. Came into the south of the Naval Annex. So this is called a south path. And what you're going to see actually happened at the Pentagon instead of that. And this is alleged at about 9:38 in the morning, 9:37 and 45 to 46 seconds, the official story. This heliport, you'll see, is extremely important for the story. And this is the heliport firehouse. It's called a security building here. This is actually the firehouse. This is hard to see, but there is a fire engine that is parked here with its back to the Pentagon wall, that had actually been moved out just before the real first attack at the Pentagon, outside attack of the white plane. And on top of, that was not Flight 77, as you'll see, and on top of the Pentagon heliport firehouse is the heliport air traffic controller's place, where there are windows, open windows out the side. And he could look down, it's going to come back, and he could look down onto the area, as you will see, is the actual outside attack at the Pentagon. And as you will see, the real first outside attack at the Pentagon was by a white plane, and because it's white, it could not have been an American Airlines airliner, 757 or otherwise, and it came in here on what we call a north path, or a north of Naval Annex path, at 9:32 and 30 seconds. Its left wing hit, dragged, scraped, different language used by a number of multiple witnesses, at or around the heliport from their vantage points, and burst into a huge fireball right here, and was destroyed into millions, some witnesses says millions of confetti-like pieces all around here. So that's the difference between the official story and what you're going to see actually happened. So the bottom line of what I'm going to prove to you is that the official story has Flight 77 coming in 5 minutes and 16 seconds after what really happened at the Pentagon with an entirely separate, quite large plane. All right. That's a rough overview. This is an important graphic. I think it's the last overview graphic. It's important for people to understand that this is the west face of the Pentagon. The graphic you just saw was from about there to there. So it didn't show the right-hand side. This is the west side of the Pentagon. This is the alleged impact point right here, and that official story path, the south path, versus the actual north path of the white plane over 5 minutes earlier. And most people think, they've heard that the wedge one, there's wedge one, was hardened to withstand a terrorist attack, either a bomb, a truck bomb, or a bomb placed on the wall, or a high force lateral impact as of a plane impact. It had just been hardened. Now most people think that wedge one is the whole west side. That's not correct. Wedge one is actually from here on this side, up and around and down the center line of the west face to the corner. So what's important about that is the wall where the official story says Flight 77 hit, and it had been hardened to prevent a plane from getting through. That is not true of this part of the west face, which is, that should read wedge 2, not wedge 5, it's just mismarked. It's not true from the center line to the north or to the left. And that turns out to be very important, as you'll see. All right. Now, you know what? I'm going to go through these. All right. So, starting the formal presentation. The real 9/11 plot, I'm going to demonstrate to you, was years or even decades in the planning. 9/11 Commission member John Kerry, that's not Secretary of State, there's the other John Kerry, said that 9/11 was a conspiracy, he said this publicly, was a conspiracy that was 30 years in the making. Well, if you take 2001 and subtract 30 years, you get 1971. In the early 1970s, there was no Al-Qaeda. President Bush Sr. on September 11th, 1971, and personally, I do not think that date is a coincidence. I think this is part of a very long-term plan with George Bush Sr. right at the head. He said, quote, "What is at stake here is a big idea, a new world order. A new world order can emerge. Now we can see a new world order coming into view. There is a very real prospect of a new world order." David Rockefeller, former governor of New York, his family built the World Trade Center towers that came down on 9/11. Quote, "We are on the verge of a global transformation, and all we need is the right major crisis, and the nations will accept the new world order." Bush works with Rockefellers. Nicholas Rockefeller, not a direct relative of David Rockefeller, but part of the elite Rockefeller clan family. Nicholas Rockefeller said to film producer Aaron Russo in September of 2000, a full year before 9/11, and you can see this, him saying this on the internet, on YouTube, quote, "There's going to be an event, and out of that event we're going to invade Afghanistan so we can run pipelines through the Caspian Sea, so we can go into Iraq to take the oil and establish bases in the Middle East and make the Middle East part of the New World Order." And then he goes on to say, "In my relationships with some of these people, the Rockefellers, etc., the East Coast elite, that is as evil as it gets," unquote. Nicholas Rockefeller also told Russo that if he joined them, Russo would be spared, quote, "the police state measures that would be imposed on the rest of the American public after the event happened." Bush and his future National Security Advisor, Condoleezza Rice, clearly wanted war before Bush even announced that he was running for the presidency. He told his confidants, and they have published this in books, that he wanted to be a, quote, "war president" before even announcing his candidacy for president. Rice, who was Bush's 2000 campaign National Security Advisor, as well as his NSC advisor in the White House once he gained power, told the 9/11 Commission, quote, "The U.S. didn't act against the growing threat from Imperial Japan until it became all too evident in Pearl Harbor. And tragically, for all the language of war before September 11th, Our country simply was not yet on a war footing. Now, to be a war president, you need a war. And to get a war, you need a pretext for that war. One full year before 9/11 in September 2000, as you saw, as Nicholas Rockefeller was telling Aaron Russo about the coming event, which happened exactly a year later on 9/11, the neoconservative, known as Neocon, Project for a New American Century, also called PNAC or PNAC, actually called in their document, a published document, for a new Pearl Harbor as the desired event. In their document, Rebuilding America's Defenses, on page 51, you will find this quote. It's very famous. It's the basis of the title of David Ray Griffin's first book, The New Pearl Harbor. Quote, "The process of U.S. military and intelligence transformation, even if it brings revolutionary change, is likely to be a long one, in other words, too long, take too long, absent, that is without, some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor," unquote. Following the 2000 election theft, and it was stolen, but that would be an entirely different 2-hour presentation, the Project for New American Century neocons quickly prepared the ground in the public's mind for the coming event that they had planned for something like 3 decades, which we now call 9/11 or September 11th, to be seen by the public and Congress and the media as a surprise attack. At his confirmation hearing in the Senate Judiciary Committee for Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld was already warning of a surprise attack on this country. Quote, "We know that the thing that tends to register on people is fear, and we know that tends to happen after there is a greatly desired Pearl Harbor," unquote. In the moments leading up to September 11th, in the months leading up to September 11th, Rumsfeld handed out hundreds of copies of a very old book by one of the neocon leaders, Roberta Wohlstetter. It was published in 1962, and it is known, in fact, on the cover is the quote from a reviewer saying, "This is the most important book, taking the position that Pearl Harbor was indeed a surprise attack, and also based upon intelligence failures." Where did you hear that? Immediately after 9/11. And so this book that he started passing out in the months leading up to 9/11, hundreds of copies, pushes the false surprise attack and intelligence failures lie about the original World War II Pearl Harbor attack. And Roberta Wohlstetter, the author, is the wife of the man who's known as the neocon's godfather. His name is Albert Wohlstetter, and he was also the mentor to Deputy Secretary of Defense and neocon Paul Wolfowitz. And then, if you may recall, in May of 2001, literally as Vice President Cheney was given charge of all counterterrorism preparations, that was on May 8th of 2001, and it was announced publicly on the White House website, the movie Pearl Harbor hit theaters across the country. I wondered at the time when I saw it, why is a Pearl Harbor movie coming out now? And as fate would have it, the man who was the Navy's man in Hollywood happened to be my supervisor and boss, the public affairs officer at the Naval Postgraduate School. And I happened to know from conversations with him that he was on board actual Navy ships for the making of the movie Pearl Harbor to ensure historical accuracy and pyrotechnic special effects like big fireballs. Now, to understand what the Project for New American Century Manifesto was really calling for when it called for a new Pearl Harbor, we of course need to know the truth about the original Pearl Harbor. And this is emphasized in the very beginning of Mizuko's magnificent new 9/11 documentary called 9/11: The New Pearl Harbor. What you need to know and prove to yourself is that the original Pearl Harbor attack was not a surprise attack. And the way you do that, the best way to do that, besides the beginning of the new video, 9/11: The New Pearl Harbor, which goes back to the original Pearl Harbor in World War II, December 7th, 1941, proving it was not a surprise attack, is to read this wonderful book called Day of Deceit by Robert Stinnett, who is still alive. And be sure and get the most recent edition. It is based upon, just before it was published, the National Archives declassified and released documents proving his theory in the book, which is no longer a theory, that in fact Roosevelt and the Navy High Command and the whole military high command and Churchill knew every detail of the coming attack and intentionally kept it from Admiral Husband Kimmel, who was the head of the Pacific Command and Pearl Harbor, leading up to Pearl Harbor and World War II. The Roosevelt and Navy High Command, the attack on Pearl Harbor was very greatly desired. That you learn in this book that that FDR and the Navy High Command developed and carried out an explicit 8-point plan to provoke Japan to attack. That we had broken the Japanese codes and knew the where and when of the coming attack at least a week in advance. That FDR and the Navy High Command ordered the moving of the Navy's high-value asset ships, the aircraft carriers, out of Pearl Harbor, leaving the other ships intentionally as sitting ducks. Not long before 9/11, the National Archives declassified those documents, as I mentioned, proving that Admiral Kimmel had been kept in the dark by FDR and the Navy High Command about the coming attack on Pearl Harbor, about its date and its time, approximate time. And the Senate, not long before 9/11, voted unanimously to return his rank and restore the benefits to his survivors. FDR had made him the scapegoat and actually blamed him for not protecting Pearl Harbor when he was set up not to be able to protect Pearl Harbor. And also in a column shortly after 9/11, George Will, who is hardly a flaming liberal columnist, reminded his readers, having been very conscious of the unanimous Senate vote not long before 9/11, he reminded his readers shortly after the 9/11 attacks of Roosevelt's perfidy with Admiral Kimmel and warned that the September 11th attacks, that what the public was being told about them also might not be the real story. So the Project for New American Century's call for a new Pearl Harbor was actually a call for a highly desired and facilitated attack on what? On an iconic major U.S. military facility that could then be sold to the American public and the world as a surprise attack, which it was not. On September 11th, the mainstream media also were complicit in pushing this specific new Pearl Harbor line literally as the Twin Towers were burning. The BBC immediately began to play clips of Pearl Harbor interleaved with the smoking Pentagon and World Trade Center towers. Tom Brokaw of NBC, as the attacks were unfolding on air, there's been a declaration of war on the U.S. by terrorists. This is the most serious attack on the U.S. since Pearl Harbor. Dan Rather of CBS, reading from a script. You can see these on YouTube. Quote, "This is the day that will, as was with Pearl Harbor, live in infamy in American history," unquote. Peter Jennings of ABC, they got all the networks covered. Quote, "The last time there was an attack like this on the U.S. was Pearl Harbor," unquote. And Time Magazine's special September 2001 issue that they raced out, quote, "What's needed in response to the attacks is a unified, unifying Pearl Harbor, sort of purple American fury, a ruthless indignation that doesn't leak away in only a week or two." In his 9/11 diary, the evening of 9/11, the night of 9/11, Bush wrote, you can read about this in his memoirs, Decision Points, quote, "The Pearl Harbor of the 21st century happened today," unquote. So, for all these reasons, it was the Pentagon attack that made 9/11 into that highly desired and facilitated event that made it into a new Pearl Harbor, the event that Nicholas Rockefeller told Russo about exactly 1 year before 9/11. That event was needed and called for by the neocons, and I here listed the neocons, the signatories of that very, I call it the neoconservative manifesto, where that important quote is on page 51, calling for a new Pearl Harbor. They had taken over, once Bush and Cheney took power, they took over all of the power positions, the political appointed power positions in the government, needed to actually roll out their global domination agenda and domestic surveillance police state once the event actually happened. And only, of course, the Pentagon attack could have ensured that the United States would be at war on terror. And by the way, this is a general, an Army general who at the time was head of the NSA's Signals Intelligence Division. So for all these reasons I've given you, this is why Masamu Mizuko's new film, 9/11, The New Pearl Harbor, actually begins with the Pentagon. It doesn't begin with the Twin Towers. It doesn't begin with World Trade Center 7 or Pennsylvania. It begins with the Pentagon. And that is because he agrees that the Pentagon is the core of the real plot of 9/11. And why wouldn't the Twin Towers have guaranteed their war on terror? This is an educated opinion on my part. I believe it's shared by Masamu Mizuko. And that is that the World Trade Center towers, don't forget that World Trade Center 1 had already been attacked in 1993. A basement, a truck bomb, and the B2 level of the basement. It killed 5 or 6 people and wounded about 1,000. There had to be helicopter rescues from the roof. There was smoke every place coming from the towers. And yet, the World Trade Center 1 attack in 1993 was perfectly well handled, as was Oklahoma City, by the civilian courts. And the national security state that wanted to be created after the event happened wanted to be able to take so-called terrorists to military tribunals instead of their being handled by the civilian justice system. The new Pearl Harbor Pentagon attack also had to succeed to justify everything I'm about to mention. And of course, for it to succeed, they had to control it. They had to actually do the Pentagon attack. The new Pearl Harbor Pentagon attack also had to succeed to justify declaring the war on terror, as I said. It had to succeed for Bush to be able to, because he needed to call it a war, for him to be able to invoke his war powers under the Constitution, his so-called commander-in-chief powers under Article 2 of the Constitution, which he and Cheney and other members of his administration, their administration, did over and over and over publicly to justify the violation of our Bill of Rights, our Constitution, federal law, international law, and even the Nuremberg Principles. It was needed to justify the creation of a new, entirely new department, unprecedented, called the Homeland Security Department, and the creation of the surveillance police state that we are still in. For the creation, most people don't know, of the first ever combatant command over mainland United States, over the 50 states of the United States. Up until 9/11, there were combatant commands over regions of the world by the Pentagon, but not over the United States itself. After 9/11, they justified the creation of NORTHCOM, which is now a military combatant command right here in Denver, includes Denver. It also was used to justify the first formal initiation of the continuity in government operation. Now, it's extremely important that there was a secret committee, a secret group inside the federal government that was both on its surface, Democrat and Republican. It was bipartisan. And it had been going on for a very long time, for approximately 30 years. And there's your John Kerry's quote. This is a conspiracy that's been being planned for 30 years. Bush Sr., Vice President Cheney, then Vice President Cheney, Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, Richard Clark, who was the counterterrorism advisor in the National Security Council to Bush, but had also been in 2 previous presidents, including Democratic President Clinton. Oliver North, where do you remember him? From Iran-Contra. And other names that you would recognize. These people had been part of a secret government operation to set up what they call continuity of government, which needed an emergency event, a crisis, in order to trigger and go live, to become active. And that, in fact, happened on 9/11. Bush gave the authorization to Rice, his national security advisor, by phone, who in turn instructed Richard Clark, the White House National Security Advisor, to initiate COG, continuity of government is abbreviated COG, on 9/11. And when I was at the Naval Postgraduate School, I did an interview with Richard Clark, who came there. And many people, many top officials of the federal government and military and intelligence community come to the Naval Postgraduate School. I was the senior military affairs journalist, so I interviewed him. And in this interview, which the article from which was published on a DoD website, he told me that the federal government, that the military had exercised 5 times the event that could trigger continuity of government's initiation, 5 times before 9/11, 5 times. And therefore, it was the 6th time on 9/11 that it actually went into formal initiation. The 9/11 official story now, just to remind you, is that the September 11th New Pearl Harbor attacks were a complete surprise, like the original Pearl Harbor. And now we're going to see why, just a few very important reasons why this couldn't have been, that the 9/11 attacks were absolutely not a surprise attack. It is a fact that the flying Pentagon, this most highly classified plane in the entire U.S. military establishment, it's called an E-4B, was circling over Washington, D.C. This is an image taken from television, from Discovery Channel. It was on CNN live on 9/11. It was circling over Washington, D.C. before and as the Pentagon was actually attacked from the outside for the first time, which is over 5 minutes, as you will see later in this presentation, was over 5 minutes before the government says Flight 77 got anywhere close to the building. And it was flying above Washington, D.C. during the Pentagon's 6th continuity of government exercise, during which 6th COG exercise, COG was taken live because of the actual attacks. Secretary of Defense Robert Gates, most people don't know this, has confirmed to ABC's Diane Sawyer on board the E-4B on 2020, ABC's 2020, that it was indeed the flying Pentagon E-4B that was circling over Washington, D.C. on 9/11. And that E-4B has far-reaching radar and command and control capabilities. It is not possible for it to have been circling over Washington, D.C. and the official story of 9/11, that Flight 77 or whatever plane, as you'll see later, was actually flying back east to Washington, D.C. It is impossible that that plane was lost to radar if there is an E-4B circling over Washington, D.C. The second reason that the 9/11 Pentagon attack cannot be a surprise, the military was conducting multiple counterterrorism exercises on the morning of 9/11 itself, on both hijack scenarios and the scenarios of planes crashing into the towers of buildings. Now, I'm the first researcher who brought this out. Also, NORAD Northeast Sector was holding such an exercise. That is the northeast sector of NORAD, which is an Air Force agency, the agency that has to scramble the fighter jets and didn't for an hour and 40 minutes on 9/11. It's one of the great mysteries of 9/11. All of the four attacks of 9/11, the World Trade Center towers, the Pentagon, and Pennsylvania, are all in NORAD Northeast Sector. They were holding a Vigilant Guardian, Vigilant Warrior hijack scenario exercise on the morning of 9/11, and that has now been publicly acknowledged by the head of NORAD Northeast Sector, Colonel Bob Marr, in a book called Touching History, page 24. Also, the National Reconnaissance Office, abbreviated NRO, was holding a plane crashing into tower simulated emergency response exercise on the morning of 9/11 in the outskirts of Washington, D.C. itself. And of course, I just mentioned that the Pentagon E-4B was circling over Washington, and as you will see, the real plane attack on the Pentagon was by a white plane that was mocked up or painted up with a red and a white, a red and a blue stripe down the side, so that it could be mistaken for by witnesses that morning around the Pentagon for an American Airlines civilian airliner. But the very fact that it was painted white leads me to believe that it was actually used in an exercise, in another counterterrorism exercise at the Pentagon that morning, and it was painted white so that no one, as part of the exercise, in the defense end of the exercise, the blue team end of the exercise, would mistake it for an actual American Airlines plane, which is polished silvery aluminum. Donald Rumsfeld, who headed the Pentagon, also predicted his Pentagon attack just before it actually happened. Now, this is another reason, of course, it's not a surprise attack. As the two World Trade Center attacks were happening, Rumsfeld, in the Pentagon, in a meeting in the Pentagon, that he had called the night before, September 10th, told Pentagon military leaders with whom he was meeting that a, quote, shocking event would soon occur that would remind Americans of the need for a stronger military, which was called for, by the way, in the Project for New American Century manifesto, which he signed. And recall that at his confirmation hearing for Secretary of Defense, he warned of a surprise attack on the U.S. of a Pearl Harbor. And as the flying Pentagon E-4B was circling overhead his very building, he said, quote, to the people in his office, quote, "Believe me, this isn't over yet. to Representative Christopher Cox. There's going to be another attack, and it could be us here at the Pentagon. And Associated Press reported on 9/11, quote, "The Pentagon attack came only minutes after Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld predicted to Cox, there will be another event. Mark my words. Inside explosives have to be pre-planted, and Rumsfeld was expecting them. This is the evidence for that. I already gave you that Associated Press quote. Also, shortly after the attacks to ABC's Sam Donaldson, when asked what happened at his building, he said, I'm not sure, a bomb? Fort Monmouth auditor Michael Nielsen, whom I personally interviewed, and two of his co-workers from Fort Monmouth in New Jersey, as well as the most important Pentagon witness you're about to hear about, April Gallup, they all saw bomb-sniffing dog teams in the Pentagon metro stop as early as 7:30 on the morning of 9/11. And that metro stop was shut down immediately after, according to the Washington Post, the first explosion at the Pentagon. It actually took quite a bit of time for the Pentagon to put out the official lie. At its first press briefing on September 12th, believe it or not, there was not a single mention of either Flight 77, a Boeing 757, or a Boeing 757. 3 days later only, at the Pentagon's September 15th press briefing, the next press briefing, there was none in between, the official story is finally fully formed. And here we have Mr. Avey, who is Pentagon spokesperson. He was in charge of the Pentagon renovation of Wedge 1, which had just been hardened to withstand precisely such terrorist attack as they claim managed to get through the wall that was designed to prevent it. This is actually taken from a Pentagon website, and you can see that this has got the Pentagon logo, Pentagon Renovation Program logo up here in the left corner, and this is their presentation of what they're claiming to be the official story, so-called South Path, right here, and they've got the plane much larger than it would be if it were properly proportioned. But this, of course, is not what happened, and I've already shown you this graphic of the side of the Pentagon showing that it's only this Wedge 1 here that was hardened, and that's the alleged official story impact point in Wedge 1. Now, the real story at the Pentagon, just as at the World Trade Center, I'm now going to prove to you, is pre-planted inside explosives with plane destructions and resultant fires as the mere cover cause. Now, if any pre-planted explosives were detonated at the Pentagon, and I can show that to you, then we have proven that the official story has to be a lie. And in fact, as you will see, there were many. And those pre-planted explosives went off both inside and outside the building, as I will demonstrate to you. And the main one that happened at 9:30, almost 8 minutes before Flight 77 came anywhere close to the building, happened before that alleged impact, and therefore Flight 77 or anything that came towards the building at almost 9:38, the official story, alleged impact time, could not have been the cause of these early 9:30 and 9:32 attacks. The official story claims that a plane penetrated, very importantly, only, as I mentioned earlier, to the inside of the third of 5 rings into the building. However, the fact is there was intense fire and destruction in the 2 innermost rings further in beyond that. Those are the B ring and the A ring. Now, if there's any devastation from internal explosives at all, let alone in 1, let alone 2 rings further in to the building, beyond what the official lie says, the plane even at its very most penetrated, or any part of it, or any quasi-liquid slurry from it, which is what they finally decided caused the alleged exit hole in the inside of the 3rd ring in, then we have absolutely proven that the official story is a lie on that alone. These are quotes from Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations on 9/11, former very high-level Army Green Beret Robert Andrews. On 9/11, he was in this position as Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations. In a personal interview with me at the Naval Postgraduate School, which I published on a DoD website, he said, quote, "My aide and I had to walk over dead bodies on the inside of the furthest in A ring, just before you get to the inner courtyard." A Marine major to the Washington Post published the day after 9/11, quote, "The B ring, that's the 4th ring in, between the 4th and the 5th quarters." I think I'll go back and show you that. This is very important, actually. All right, here's wedge 1. This was hardened. You don't see the quarters here, but there's a quarter. Yes, you do. This is the quarter. So this is quarter 4, and it's within the hardened wedge 1. This is quarter 5. It's within the unhardened wedge 2, unhardened as of 9/11. They were about to start the hardening the next day, or at most 2 days later. So when they say between quarter 5 and quarter 4, it's somewhere in here. So when he's saying the B ring, oops.
There you go.
When he's saying the B ring, which is this fourth ring in, between this quarter and that quarter, he's talking about right in there. And the official story says that the alleged plane didn't get any further than there. And a further quote from Greenbelt Fire Department, one of the fire departments that came to put out the fires at the Pentagon, and Rescue Squad volunteer firefighter. He says, our first task was to stand by outside the B ring, that's that fourth ring in, while the Arlington Fire Department attempted to make entry into the B ring, but the fire there was just too intense and the crew quickly had to retreat. And this is just some of the quotes. Now again, these are the innermost 2 rings of the Pentagon, well beyond where the official lie says a plane at its very furthest penetrated. Pentagon rescue team. When we got into the building, we started to feel the heat right away. As we walked deeper down the hallways, deeper means towards the center of the courtyard, it got hotter and hotter. It was just fire everywhere, not so much smoke, just fire all around us. You couldn't see a plane, just debris wherever you looked, to the Washington Post online on 9/11 itself. Many witness reports of inside explosions could only have been from explosives. So some people say, oh, well, that's just fires from the planes. The answer to that is, no, that's not possible if the official lie says that the plane only penetrated in 3 rings and you've got fires and devastation and destruction on the inner 2 rings further in than that. Now we have high-level witness reports from the very highest level of the military command chain on down of inside the building explosives. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff himself, the highest military officer in the United States military establishment, General Hugh Shelton on 9/11, upon first arriving at the Pentagon, in fact, in his memoirs, his autobiography, Without Hesitation, page 434, he states that when he was even quite a ways away from the Pentagon, the smell of cordite was overwhelming, even further away, and when he got there, it was almost unbearable. Cordite cannot be confused, especially by military personnel, for burning jet fuel, which is essentially kerosene. They are completely different smells. Don Perkle, who was a witness inside the building, people shouted in the corridor outside my office that a bomb had gone off. Even before stepping outside, I could smell the cordite. Then I knew explosives had been set off somewhere in the building. And there are other witnesses as well. Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld's own 3-star military aide. And this is a quote. This is about Captain Joe Leidig, who was the acting head of the National Military Command Center on 9/11. He, Captain Charles Joe Leidig, had no awareness of Flight 77 coming back to D.C. His first awareness was a call of any problem at the Pentagon, was a call from Rumsfeld's 3-star aide, an extremely high-ranking military officer, who asked if Leidig had felt the explosion in the building. This is from the 9/11 Commission. This inside explosion was also immediately communicated to the White House PIOC, where Vice President Cheney was. Quote, I was already down in the PIOC. Now, this is from Eric Edelman to Evan Thomas of Newsweek, published in Newsweek. And it's also still online in the Office of the Vice President's internal transcript, October 25th, 2001. I was already down in the White House bunker, the PIOC, with Vice President Cheney when we got word that there was an explosion at the Pentagon. That was their first information. Secretary of Transportation Mineta, you can see this on YouTube and video. Someone came into the PIOC and said, quote, Mr. Vice President, there's been an explosion at the Pentagon. An instant reaction of, according to the official story, there was only one sole survivor of the Naval Command Center. The Naval Command Center is 2 and 3 rings in the alleged penetration path of Flight 77 in Wedge 1. His name is Lieutenant Kevin Schaefer. I happened to work with him at the Naval Postgraduate School before he went to Washington, D.C. to the Pentagon. He has stated this in a published article in Naval Institute Proceedings. Quote, "It must have been a bomb," is what he first thought when a massive explosion happened in the 3rd ring in, creating an immense fireball planted by one of the many construction workers on the Pentagon renovation team or technical contractors who were still milling about. Lieutenant Commander David Tarantino of the Pentagon Search and Rescue Team, who got into the Naval Command Center area where Kevin Schaefer had been, and according to the official story, was the only survivor of 43 military officers there that morning. He said the Naval Command Center, was a bombed-out office space. Army Fort Monmouth Auditor Michael Nielsen, I mentioned him before. He has told me, and I've published this, quote, "Hundreds raced down the hall past me and out the south side exit of the Pentagon shouting, 'It's a bomb, bombs, it's a bomb.'" Witnesses to inside explosions and also include witnesses to a series of what absolutely sound like controlled demolition charges inside the Pentagon. For instance, Lieutenant McGowan on the 1st floor D ring. D ring is the 2nd ring in on the 1st floor in the alleged penetration path of a plane. This sounds like controlled demolition charges, probably with thermite. Quote, "It sounded like a series of explosions going off. It sounded like a series of bombs exploding, similar to like firecrackers when you light them, and you just get that series going off." This is absolutely identical language to the description by one of the World Trade Center firefighters in the famous Naudet brothers video, when they are referring to what is now known to have been pre-placed controlled demolition explosive charges in the World Trade Center. And you can see that in the Naudet brothers video. Lieutenant Colonel Thurman, 2nd floor D ring, quote, "To me, it didn't seem like a plane. To me, it seemed like it was a bomb. Being in the military, I've been around grenade and artillery explosions, in other words, bombs. It was a 2-part explosion." Now, this is from the Naughty video with that firefighter going, bum, 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 bum. Sounded like firecrackers. I'm not going to take the time to do that, so we can move forward. I'm going to show you the location of the explosion that Lieutenants McGowan and Thurman experienced. This has to be what they experienced, and this graphic is from the Pentagon Building Performance Report that was put together at the request of the Pentagon by the American Society of Civil Engineers, ASCE. A little bit difficult to see, but right here there is a vertical orangish, light orange rectangle. And that's what I'm going to be talking about here. And as you'll see that rectangle is in the B ring, or excuse me, the D ring, 1 ring in from the outside. So there was a major 1st floor Wedge 1 D ring explosion that violently, this is effectively a quote from the Pentagon Building Performance Report, that violently thrust the 2nd floor floor slab, that is the ceiling of the 1st floor of the 2nd ring in the Naval Command Center, upwards. The Pentagon Building Performance Report itself states that this was, quote, "probably due to an independent," and the context makes it clear of any plane impact, alleged plane impact, "probably due to an independent explosion, as fire," meaning from a plane impact, "would at most have collapsed the 2nd floor downwards." There was also a major inside explosion, this is extremely important, near April Gallup's desk. She was an Army enlisted who was on an officer career track. She had just returned from 3 months pregnancy and childbirth leave. That very day on September 11th, first moment back in her office, she was declassifying. She was supposed to start declassifying documents. She had a top secret psi clearance, which is about as high as you can get. Her desk was in the outer E-ring of Wedge 2. Now that's extremely important because if you remember, Wedge 2 had not yet been hardened, and Wedge 2 was to the left, so you're facing the west wall, is to the left or the north of the center line, and at least 120 to 150 feet north of the alleged impact point in Wedge 1 of Flight 77. That didn't even happen, according to the government, for almost another 8 minutes. Now I'm going to show you where April Gallup's desk was relative to the official story alleged impact path. Here we go again. You have to remember to keep this. This is the alleged impact point at column 14 in wedge 1. You see the dividing line between wedge 1 and wedge 2? This is the hardened part of the outer wall. This is not hardened. This is the alleged impact point in column 14. This white triangle looks like something you throw, make a paper airplane. This white triangle is the alleged destruction path that destroyed and damaged some of the internal columns. That's what these vertical things are, the internal columns inside. And it went past the wedge 1, wedge 2 boundary, and allegedly poked its nose, or some part of the plane, out of the inside of the third ring. So that's the official story. April Gallup's desk was way over here, in wedge 2, on the inside of the outer ring. In an under oath sworn videotape statement, which she gave to me, and I played, screened for members of the Colorado 9/11 Truth Movement 2 evenings ago at the Hopper's house, April Gallup swears on that videotape to the following: that there was a violent explosion near her desk in wedge 2, far from the official story alleged impact point, which stopped her wristwatch. At 9:30, she's kept the watch in her safe deposit box. Quote, "I thought I had triggered it when I touched the on button on my computer," she said. "I thought it was a bomb." And she had been trained in the Army about explosives. She recognized a bomb when she heard it and felt it. She said there was no smell of jet fuel, no jet fuel fires, no plane seats, no luggage, etc. Of course, you wouldn't expect it down in the second, in wedge 2. She said the floor was not hot. She actually walked out with only one shoe and one bare foot. And as you'll see from this photograph, this is April Gallup on the lawn outside the Pentagon. She doesn't have burns on her body, not even on one of her bare feet. And the floor was not hot. A dozen other Pentagon survivors in the Army area that she meets with, a kind of victim support group, they experienced the same thing in that area of the Pentagon. Oh, in this photograph, this is her infant son that she brought to work that morning, Elijah, who also survived the attack. April Gallup also did not walk out of the so-called entrance hole of Flight 77 or any plane that allegedly impacted in wedge 1. She was actually coached to believe and say that by 3 very high-ranking military officers who came to her bedside in her most vulnerable condition, in shock and in pain, immediately after the attack at George Washington University Hospital. And they told her what had happened. They said a plane hit the building. They asked her what happened. She said, I was sure it was a bomb, and it might have been triggered when I pressed the on button on my computer, and said, oh, no, it was a plane. And you, April Gallup, walked out of the entrance hole of that plane, which was only about 35 to 45 feet from your desk. And that's not true. We know that's not true. Both April Gallup and her colleagues, her officer colleagues in the Army area, gave official interviews to Army historians in late 2001, which are on the record. You can read them online, in which it is very clear that Gallup and her son were helped through the first floor window behind this fire truck. This is if you recall from the graphic at the beginning of this talk, this is the firehouse by the heliport, which is over here. All of this is in the north, to the left or the north of the center line of the Pentagon. And this fire truck was parked here just before the actual first white plate attack on the Pentagon, just after 9/32. And this, it's hard to see a little bit, but this is a window that was blown out, and April Gallup was helped out of that window, and she and her infant son. And testimony to that effect is by the men who rescued her out of the window to Army historians. The first Pentagon attack was actually at almost 9:30 or 9:30, almost precisely according to April Gallup. And the fact that this is true explains why there were no advanced sirens or alerts to warn inside Pentagon personnel of a coming attack, because it wasn't from a plane at that point. It was from pre-placed inside the building explosives. And indeed, there were many inside the building explosions in the so-called Flight 77 plane penetration path that simply could not have been caused by any impactor, even Santa Claus's sleigh, at around 9:38, for instance. At 9:31 and 40 seconds, there is a stopped You'll see that clock later in this presentation. There is a stopped clock from the Naval Command Center, from either the D or the C ring, that is the second and the third ring in. It stopped at 9:31 and 40 seconds from a violent event there. And this is also because of what you saw a few moments ago. It's likely also the time of the controlled demolition-like sequence D-ring explosions that McGowan and Thurman experienced, that I gave you the quotes earlier. Lieutenant Kevin Schaefer in the third ring in the Naval Command Center in Wedge 1 in the alleged plane penetration path said in print that at precisely 9:43 there was this huge explosion with an orange fireball in the Naval Command Center. 9:43 is 9:38. That's 5 minutes after the alleged impact of Flight 77 or anything on the outside of the wall. And the Pentagon Building Performance Report states explicitly that even according to the official story, a Boeing airliner, even if it got through the wall, was completely destroyed in the first second. The Secret Service log states that there was another Pentagon explosion at approximately 9:48, and there were explosions going off on columns in the alleged penetration path, triggering the ultimate collapse of the E-ring, the outer E-ring wall in Wedge 1 at 10:10. Now you're going to see evidence that the plane penetration path that the official story says was made by Flight 77, a Boeing 757 getting through the wall that was specifically designed to prevent that, was made with explosives. And again, that white arrow is the alleged plane penetration path according to the Pentagon's own building performance report that was commissioned by the Pentagon. Now, this is a very important photograph, and this is a photograph of an explosion at exactly what the government claims, the Pentagon claims, is the official story alleged impact point of Flight 77. However, this photograph proves that the official story cannot be true even in and of itself. And the way that you can be sure of that is that the official story claims if this was Flight 77 impact moment that happened to be captured by some very lucky Navy photographer who had to be out here at the time, right, waiting for it to happen. This explosion, the official story claims, happened at 9:37 and 46 seconds. However, notice this. This is that big billowing black smoke cloud. It is completely established. You don't go into this very low oxygen, it takes a long time to establish this smoke cloud. And the official story also claims that a plane, the Flight 77 coming in here, triggered that fire and explosion by hitting that diesel trailer with its right wing or right engine just before that alleged explosion. So this photograph alone proves that the official story cannot be true just by the timing alone, and also you'll see later in this presentation we know the precise time of the initiation of this black smoke cloud at the diesel trailer and the diesel tank for the diesel generator, and that was 9:34 and 10 seconds, whereas this is allegedly at almost 9:38. And notice this completely independent smoke cloud here, which is from the destruction at Pentagon Heated